Okay, good. So, welcome. Today's session is going to be roughly 35 minutes. So I'm aiming to finish by 10 to 2, which means that if you've got a 2 o'clock meeting, that gives you enough time to get off this call and do whatever you need to do before your next commitment. And what I want to do today is to look at some general principles about leadership. And my plan is that as we go forward, because I'm planning to make this a weekly event, that we will look in more detail at specific areas as time goes on. Those of you that don't know me, I think, Dan, that might be just you, although I think our paths have crossed once or twice. Um, I'm a person with many different facets, but most of what I do comes down to psychology, which was my original degree. I do most of my work in the technology sector. Oh, I've got somebody else wanting to come in and join us. There you go. Okay, so I do most of my work in the technology sector, and I founded Brilliant Minds nearly 30 years ago. So we are actually in our 30th year of trading. And I decided that I would start doing this because what I'm seeing is that there is a huge need for leadership in the world, and a lot of people are not getting enough opportunity to hone their leadership skills, mostly because they're just too busy trying to deliver the day job. It's not any lack of wanting to be great leaders, it's mostly just a lack of opportunity. And just in case you were wondering, I'm not selling anything today. So, so you don't have to worry, you can engage fully in what I'm doing without feeling like it might be the first step into committing yourself to something you'd regret later. I'm definitely not selling anything. So I wanted to set the scene a little bit with why I think leadership is so important. And it's been something that's fascinated me for most of my working life. I was put into a role of leadership and management very, very early in my career. I think I was only 23 when I had my first kind of full responsibility as a manager. And it really was a case of being thrown in at the deep end. I kind of thought I knew what I was doing, but oh, did I learn a lot along the way. And it seems to me that when I look around the business world, and even, as a consumer going around, if I go to restaurants, go to hotels, and go to a theatre, whatever, the things that work really well on the receiving end as a customer are often down to really good leadership. And the places where, as a customer, I end up dissatisfied or frustrated, I think also are usually down to poor leadership, or maybe lack of leadership rather than poor leadership. So I think this is something that, if you look around your own organization, the things that are kind of not working the way that you would like to, will probably be improved by some extra focus on the leadership in that area. So those of you that know me know that I like a definition. And some of that has to do with having done science A levels and spent sort of, months of my life learning to parrot definitions of various scientific terms. But also in my 20s, I was a competitive debater. And one of the things that you do in debating competitions is you always have to define your terms really clearly, and hopefully so that the opposition can't redefine them and turn them around against you. So I've got a couple of slides to show you. Let me just find those. There we go. Just give me a thumbs up if that's visible for you now. Excellent, thank you. So, so there's loads of definitions of leadership. There's lots of different ways you can describe it. Fundamentally, I would say leadership is providing the direction and motivation that enables people to deliver results. Now, that's very general, I know, and deliberately so, because leadership comes in so many different forms, in so many different kinds of environments. And I wanted to have a definition that I could apply in all those different situations. What that means for you in your circumstances, though, will perhaps be different from person to person because, you work in different environments, you have different numbers of people, you're delivering different sorts of service, and so on. So if that's what leadership is, then what makes a great leader? And this is one of those questions, as a professional trainer and someone who offers leadership development, and I have done for, most of the 30 years that I've been in business, and in fact before that, because as a corporate trainer, I used to do quite a lot of leadership development work. And so, people will say, well, what makes a great leader? And if you ask people that question, inevitably, there are two words that will always feature. People will talk about being visionary, and they'll also talk about being charismatic. And I don't dispute that some of the great leaders throughout history and people that we might know personally have those two qualities of being visionary, of being able to see the future and being enthusiastic about it, and also having some kind of personal charisma. But as a trainer, as a coach, that's not really terribly helpful. If I was to say to people, okay, there's the secret, go and be more visionary and more charismatic, that's not really helping anybody. So I'm more interested really in how you do that. And some of that has to do with my background in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, because a lot of NLP is about modeling, about saying, if somebody's doing something really well, what can we understand about how they do that we can then take on for ourselves? So with my trainer's hat on, I'm less interested in who you are as a leader and more interested in what do you do as a leader? Because it is my firm belief that anybody can learn to be a leader. And I've had this debate with lots of people on courses where some people will say, leadership is just something that people are born with. Either you're good at it or you're not. Well, I think there are people who have a kind of natural inbuilt talent for it. That's something to do with their personality, makes it easy for them to take on a leadership role. But I do firmly believe that anybody can learn to do this. I'm not saying anybody can excel at it, but I think anybody can learn to do it, because often the only barriers to good leadership is self-confidence and the belief that you can actually do it. I don't know about you, but I remember way back when I had my first management job, being really quite sort of intimidated by the idea and wondering whether people would actually follow my lead, whether they would actually do what I asked them to do. And of course, the only way to find that out is to get in and do it. And I sort of had this idea that at some point, if I, was given the necessary promotions, that it would be sort of like I would get this kind of transformation and suddenly I would become a leader. And although I knew it was illogical, I was a little bit disappointed that even though I had the name on my business card, it didn't really confer anything at all. Actually, it didn't even give me confidence because I knew I still only had my own personal resources. So in my 20s, I was part of a voluntary organisation whose declared mission was to provide the leadership skills that are necessary to create positive change. And this was aimed specifically at people between the ages of 18 and 40. And I learned a lot in that organisation. And a lot of people were very generous with their time and their expertise and helped me develop my skills. But also as a trainer, I quite often got asked if I would run training courses on leadership. And so that was something that I really wanted to do, but I didn't have a lot to offer. And I had to kind of, digging around and, we had a few models. We had the wonderful John Adair's action-centered leadership model, which is a great model and, provided the foundation for a lot of people's leadership thinking. But it didn't really seem to apply in our position as a voluntary organisation. So a friend and I embarked on some research, and the research was actually really simple. We went around and we asked lots of people to do this. And I'd like to invite you to kind of do this for yourself. So think about one or two leaders that you've known personally and whom you regard as excellent leaders. Now, they need to be people that you've known personally to answer the next question. Because the second question then is, what did they do? Think about people that you have known personally that you would say were great leaders. What did they do? I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And this is a really important question because, as I said earlier, you ask people about what makes a great leader and they go, oh, they're visionary and they're charismatic. Yeah, okay, they might be, but I can't adopt that for myself. I can't just decide I'm going to be visionary and charismatic if it's not already in my repertoire. So what we can do is we can model what other leaders do that works for them and that works for us, as people that follow. I think looking at it from the perspective of the people who follow is quite useful, is to say, what do people resonate with? What do people want from their leader? Because you might have an idea about how you want to be a leader, but the people who are reporting into you might have slightly different ideas about what they need from you. So asking this question about, what makes a good leader from the team member's point of view proved to be very fruitful. So my friend and I, being members of a voluntary organisation, we had access to literally hundreds of people who were interested in this topic. And so over a period of a year or so, we ran a lot of workshops, and we talked to literally hundreds of people, maybe over 1,000 when I think about it. And we asked them these questions. So, who are the leaders that you have thought were really good at what they do, and what did they do? And that second question is always a little bit tricky, because inevitably, when people start thinking about it, they come out with things like, oh, well, they were very inclusive, and they made me feel good about myself, and they encouraged me. And then you start going, okay, so what do we mean by inclusive? What does somebody do that you would label them as being inclusive? How do they include people? And so what looks like a fairly straightforward question on the surface of it sometimes takes quite a lot of thought to really get to something. And what I'm aiming for is, can we find, actual behavior, actions, things that you could watch somebody doing and see the result of it, and then say to yourself, I can do that. And the beauty about doing this, about focusing on what somebody actually does, is that you can do this even with leaders that you don't think are brilliant, because everybody has skills in some areas. So you might see somebody doing something that works really well, even though in the grand scheme of things, you don't think they're one of the best leaders you've ever come across. But some people might be really good, for example, at chairing a meeting. They might be really good at making a meeting meaningful and purposeful and delivering results. But outside of that, you might not, think that highly of what they do. But there might be somebody who's really good at solving problems, or tackling difficulty within a team. So you can always go and kind of pay attention when you see something that seems to be working, that's looking really good. So after doing all of this, in the workshop, getting people to kind of, give us their examples of things that they thought were really useful behaviours of leaders, what we would do is group them together, and so there's common themes. And eventually we started to see the same patterns coming out over and over again. With some groups you'd get more on one topic, and other groups you'd get more on another. But eventually it came down to 5 discrete areas where you can look at the behavior of leaders and say, yes, what they're doing comes into these categories. And if they do things in all of these areas, then they will become great leaders. So if I go back to my slides, I'll show you the model that we eventually came up with. Share screen. Go. And when we get towards the end of the session, I'll send you a link where you can download this and use it yourself. So give me a thumbs up if you're seeing that. Just checking the tech. Thank you. Yes. So this is the model of leadership that came out of the research. And you'll see there are 4 main areas around the outside, and then in the center we've got the overview area. So if I start on the top right with purpose. So this is where our visionary bit comes from. When people go, oh, great leaders are visionary. And that may well be true if you're talking about, owners of businesses, chief executives, entrepreneurs. But for people who are leaders in the sense of being, middle senior leaders within a business, the vision probably isn't yours. The vision probably comes from the top. But what your role is to provide a sense of purpose for the people that you lead. So it might not be your vision, it might not be your idea. And that's not to say that you won't have your own sense of the kind of team you want to create, or the way you want to deliver the results that you're responsible for. But your job is more about creating a sense of purpose, of giving people a meaningful sense of, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's also about clarity of purpose and clarity of goals. So one of the things that creates a sense of purpose is having clear goals, having a clear strategy to achieve the goals. And one of the things that then feeds into that, the only way that you get meaningful goals is actually if you're aware of what's going on in the world around you. So often we see businesses fail, or at least, lose their market share and lose their reputation because they're not really paying attention to what's going on in the world. And it's very easy to get very focused on what you do. But if you're not looking outwards and saying, what's everybody else doing? What's going on here? Sometimes your vision might become out of date. Your goals might become irrelevant. So we've always got to keep an eye on what's going on outside of our own operation. And, if you're part of a big organization, the external conditions might be more to do with what's going on in the rest of the organization rather than just what's going on, with your customer market. So that's the purpose piece. Then if we move around to the top left, got this word congruence. And this really comes from NLP. In NLP, we talk a lot about congruence. I don't mean it in the mathematical sense. I mean it in the sense of, is everything lined up? And this is something that you notice more often when it's absent than when it's present. So incongruence is when somebody tells you something is important and then does the opposite. Incongruence is when somebody tells you that this is something that we've got to do, and their tone of voice tells you that they think it's going to be a waste of time. Incongruence is when the message and the non-verbal communication don't add up. And so you walk away from listening to that thinking, not really sure about that, not really on board with it. Whereas when somebody is congruent, when they're wholehearted, everything adds up. So they're giving you a message that they're backing up with their tone of voice and their body language, it becomes much more compelling. It becomes something that you think, yes, I want to get on board with that. And I believe this is actually what creates that thing we call charisma. But you can't just switch on charisma, and you can't just switch on congruence. Congruence comes from self-development. And I often say to people, if you want to be a better leader, work on yourself. Because it's those little things where we have self-doubt, where we have incomplete preparation, where maybe we're not quite aligned with what our organization's doing. It's those little things that then leak out and make us incongruent and dilute the value of our message. And of course, if you look at the model there, you'll see that sitting underneath self-development is self-awareness. The only way you can ever really improve yourself is when you know where the room for improvement is. So moving round then, if we go to bottom left, we come to the influence section, which of course is what every leader wants. We want to influence the people in our team. We also want to probably influence a peer group. And more, I talk to people in large organizations whose important area of influence is kind of up the chain of command. It's influencing their boss, it's influencing the board, it's influencing committees of various sorts. It's really about making a mark on what's going on and making sure that your purpose can be fulfilled, because not just are you aligned with what you're doing, but other people around you are also aligned as well. And the bedrock of influence is rapport with individuals. It's really difficult to have any kind of influence unless you have relationships with people, unless you're spending time having conversations, understanding where they're coming from, explaining your goals, your purpose, explaining the outcome that you want from what you're doing. When you have those sorts of conversations, that builds rapport and that opens the door for influence. If you're not engaging with people, then the amount of influence you have will definitely diminish, and quite rapidly as well. And I think this is something that's become quite challenging over the last 5 years, as a lot of the workplace has moved online. So whereas 5, 6 years ago in the pre-COVID years, a lot of people went to work every day. They went to the office, they were around their colleagues, they chatted to people, formally and informally, they saw people in the canteen and so on. Now, a lot of people are spending significant chunks of their working week working on their own in their home environment. So they're not bumping into people, they're not having as many conversations. So we have to be much more purposeful about it. We have to actually make a conscious effort to make sure that we're talking to people. So that's the influence piece. And then if I move around to the bottom right, we've got inspiration. And this is an area where we were doing the research with our volunteers. It wasn't something a lot of people talked about, but when it came out, it was often about leaders who didn't mind if somebody was better than they were at something. Leaders who could see potential and would invest in it. And I think the whole inspiration bit, it's people don't get inspired so much by somebody else. They get inspired by their own potential. And if you think back about your own career, the point at which somebody said to you, I think you're really good at that. Would you like to do more of it? That's really inspirational. Watching other people being good at something, yeah, that might be quite nice. But mostly what inspires people is the opportunity for themselves to excel. And we get that as leaders by offering people coaching. And also, I think that sits on top of what I think of as talent spotting, is noticing what people are good at, noticing when they really kind of light up and they're just like, they really love what they're doing. That's when, as leaders, you can build on that. I think a lot of organizations spend a lot of their training and development budget trying to kind of plug the gaps. So they look at what people are not so good at, and then they spend money trying to bring them up to some sort of, level of competence in that area. And in some fields and certain jobs, that's important that you're able to do everything. But actually, in a lot of cases, if we have a team environment, we don't need everybody to be competent at everything. And I think we would do so much better if we were to invest in helping people become outstanding at the things they're already good at and let somebody else do the things that they're not so good at. Because within a team, you won't have anybody that's good at everything, but you will have somebody that's good at everything. And I would say it's much more productive to let people do the things that they already have an aptitude for and that they are inspired by. So as I said, this one's a bit more rare, but it's also somewhere where you can make a massive difference as a leader. And then in the center of the model, we've got the overview area. And, you don't need a leader unless there's something that needs doing. So the overview is about understanding what the task is, what progress is being made, when you've completed. And in order to do that, you have to keep an eye on the activity. So who's doing what, what's going on, are people on schedule? And then the results that they're delivering. So is what they're doing actually achieving what you hoped it would achieve? And if not, then stepping in and helping people find the right way forward. So, a good leader isn't always hands off and isn't always hands on. A good leader knows when to do each. There are times to step in and there are times to stand back. There are times to just ask questions and there are times to tell people what to do. And you can only discern those things if you have the overview of everything that's going on. So then round the outside of the model, you'll see we've got these 4 categories. We've got self at the top and others at the bottom, which is really about saying we need a balance between what we do for ourselves, so focusing on our purpose and knowing what we want to achieve, and also developing our personal congruence so that people will buy into what we're doing and want to come with us on the journey. And then the focus on others is looking at your team and building the relationships and coaching and inspiring people around you. And how much of each of those you do depends a little bit on your own circumstances. It's not a straight kind of 50-50. If you've got an experienced team, but you've got some really challenging goals to deliver, then you might be spending more time focusing on what you're doing. If you've got people who are new in their roles or your team's under a lot of pressure, you might be focusing more of your energy on helping and supporting the people in your team. And then in the other dimension, you see we've got the present and the future. So the present, really, this is what's going on in the here and now. And if you do a customer-facing job, then you need to be present. That's the only thing that's demanded of you, really, if your customer-facing is being present to that. But also, as a leader, you need to be present to your people's needs. I'm sure you've all had the experience from time to time of going to have a conversation with somebody and they're working on their computer and they don't even look up from the screen and they say, yeah, what do you need? Well, how can I help you? And they're, kind of working away on the screen and you say, well, I just wanted to ask a question. And you get, yeah, I'm listening. Go ahead, and then the head goes back down on the screen. This is not about being present. And if you're not fully present when somebody wants your attention, then you're not going to get what you want out of that interaction. And they certainly aren't going to get what they want out of the interaction. However, if you do a very senior job, if you're the business owner, if you're a senior leader, then your job might be about the future. It might be about thinking, okay, everything's working nicely today, but what's coming up? What's coming up next week, next month, next year? What's on the horizon? How do I need to prepare my people, my organization, so that we can meet the challenges that are coming up next? And so the balance between present and future possibly depends on your areas of responsibility. But nonetheless, again, we can't assume it's 50-50. It's something that's worth thinking about. So one of the things I have for you to take away today, if you would like to, is I have a little questionnaire that you can do, which starts with the questions: are you the leader you want to be? And are you the leader that your team needs? And then there's a section where there are some things that might indicate that you should be focusing on yourself and some things that might indicate you should be focusing on others, and the same for the present and future. And if you just go through those and, kind of tick the ones that apply to you, then that'll give you some clues about what might be the right sort of balance for you. So let me put this in the chat box. I'll stop sharing my screen. That might be easier. I can see what I'm doing then. So where's the chat? So it's just a questionnaire. I've called it Getting the Balance Right. So if you click on that link, you can download PDF copy and have a little play with it. See what works for you. Okay. So we're almost at 1:45, which means I've got 5 minutes left. So do you have any questions? Anything you'd like to ask me about what I've done? I've been a very quick romp through the model. As I said, we will be digging into it in more detail in subsequent sessions. So anybody got a question you'd like to ask? I stunned you all into silence. Karen, is that you gearing up to ask me a question?
Sorry, I was just trying to figure out how to get my microphone on. Yes. Have you found, because obviously you've been using this for quite a while, have you
Yeah.
found there are differences in terms of different industries, or is leadership a kind of a universal in terms of the preferences and where people sit and all of those kind of things?
I think leadership is a universal thing. I think everybody looks for leadership. And my impression is that in modern times, it's something that people need more than they realize. I think there's so many things you could do with your working day. Most people have more going on than they can possibly handle. I regularly talk to people who say things like, well, I get 200 emails a day. I can't keep on top of it all. I just have to kind of skim the surface and hope that I'm focusing on the things that mean the most. So the person who can really provide direction, who can help you figure out what are the priorities, what are the things you really ought to be doing, then that's so valuable. It really helps because a lot of people are just drowning in opportunity. So I think leadership is universal and I think it's really necessary. I think what that looks like can vary a bit from industry to industry. That,
Yeah.
some industries, people respond well to a more hands-on and more personal approach, and other industries, people quite like to be left alone a lot of the time, which doesn't mean that you don't need to engage with them or you don't need to have influence. It just means you have to be very efficient with it. Like if you're only going to get to chat with somebody once in a week because they don't want to engage with you any more than that, you really have to make it count.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Does that
Interesting.
fit with your experience as well?
Yeah, I think it can even go sort of my experience seems to be that there can be differences between different teams and different leaderships once you get down to that kind of the micro level of individual teams.
Yeah.
It's like you've got an overall culture of the business that kind of sets a direction and a tone, I guess,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
context for engagement. But then once you get down into the individual teams, there can be huge differences between the kind of the way that one leader might operate
Mhm.
versus another leader.
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. And
And I think
interestingly, the
they
research, oh, go
well,
on.
oh, go on.
No,
You're more important.
the, the research didn't actually turn up anything about teams. So
Mm,
nobody ever said, a really great leader is somebody who builds a great team, because they were
mm,
focused on, what did my leader do for me?
mm.
Yeah. But I think what happens is that when a leader is providing great direction and they're giving people a sense of purpose, when they are congruent themselves about what they're asking people to do and they build good relationships with people, then I think that necessarily builds a good team, because they've got a common purpose, they've got a common sense of what they're there to do, and they've got a leader who they can depend on, not to keep moving the goalposts or changing their minds about things. And so that necessarily creates a great team. But nobody asked the question, or when they were asked the question, kind of said, "Oh yeah, well, my great leadership role models are people who build great teams." So,
Yeah, yeah,
and I think you're absolutely right, Karen, that what looks like a good team varies enormously depending on the personalities in the team, the personality of the leader, and what that team is actually being asked to do. But if you dig in and look at the components of that, you will usually find the things that I've been talking about, a part of
absolutely.
what they do as a team. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I just think the shape could probably vary
Hmm. Yes.
between different teams because obviously what is an accountancy team might look very different from a sales and marketing team in
Yes.
the same organization. Or they may look the same. Who
Yes.
knows?
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the amount of rigor or flex that you have within your organizational structure
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
and sort of processes.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting.
Mm.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Yeah. Okay. So, any other questions? Hello, Bruce. Nice to see you, even though you weren't able to be here for the whole thing. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, then, I'm going to leave you with a couple of extra things. If you would like to join us again next week, we'll be on the same Zoom link. If you prefer, then you can always sign up to get a weekly reminder. And also, if you'd like to be able to access the recordings of these sessions, then, oops, let me just find that link. There we go. So if I put that link in. Yeah, so if you want to sign up so you get a weekly reminder and a little bit of information about the session, I've just put a link in the chat for that. And you'll also get a link to watch the recordings if you miss something. But as I said, it's the same link. So if you bookmark wherever you stored this one, then you can come back and join us next week. I'd love a little bit of feedback. If you've got some thoughts, stick that in the chat for me. That would be really useful. And if you've got any topics that you think you'd like me to talk about in the coming weeks, that would also be great. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you next week. If you want to spend the next 10 minutes reflecting on what we've done, you've got the form that I've sent you the link to, the one that's called Getting the Balance Right. But otherwise, if you'd like to stay online for 10 minutes, I will put you in a breakout room with one other person so that you can have a little chat about what we've talked about and just verbalize some of your thinking, because I know some people would rather do that than spend their time thinking about it on their own. Okay.